Okay, hello. My name is Eric Hollinger. My Tlingit name is Duckwu. I'm adopted Ducklo-Adi. And I'd like to ask permission of the Akwan Kwan people to speak here. Kunakshish Glinedi. We have Wushkitan among our speakers in our group. Anna Bennett will be speaking, and we're pleased to have her join us. George and James Bennett were scheduled to speak with me on this, but they were unable to attend. A lot of this talk is about their visit to the Smithsonian, but we're pleased to have George's daughter Anna with us to speak about her experience visiting the Smithsonian and about a little bit about their experience as well. And we're also expanding the paper. I'm pleased to be able to have Lyle and Kolene James, our friends, join us, who also visited the Smithsonian a few months after the Bennetts did. So we're going to have a kind of everybody who's visited the Smithsonian lately and done Tlingit research there is going to speak today. So we'll get a good, well-rounded view of everybody's experiences. The Smithsonian Institution is the world's largest museum complex. We currently have 19 museums. Actually, I think there's one on here that we haven't listed yet because it's so new. The National Museum of African American History and Culture has been, the groundbreaking has taken place on that, and we have collections for that museum, but it hasn't yet been built. They're in the process of building it. Of the 19 museums and research facilities, 3 have Native American collections. Do we have a laser pointer? Steve, do you have any laser pointers? Thank you. You can see them highlighted in yellow here, the 3 that have Native American collections. And the American History Museum, National Museum of American History, has a pretty small collection. And the Museum of the American Indian has about 800,000 items in its collections, including archival material. They're our most recent edition that has Native American collections. And the Natural History Museum, which is where I work, has the largest collections of the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian has about 136 million items in its collections. Of that, around 116 to 125 million, depending on how you count them, are at the Natural History Museum, and that includes everything from the Hope Diamond to fleas and giant squids and things like that. Meteorites that came from Mars and landed in Antarctica. We have a little bit of everything. And we have the largest collection of Native American materials and anthropological materials from all over the world, over 3 million items. Oh, I should have showed this slide when I was talking about the range of things that we have at the Natural History Museum. So I work in the repatriation office of the Natural History Museum, so I'm the guy that you come to when you think that there may be materials in the collection that you're interested in having repatriated. And our office, as you've heard some of the other talks earlier today and talks about Bob's work with human remains, Bob has visited the museum and seen a lot of these collections and done repatriations of remains from our museum as well. Gunakshish Bob. And we also deal with sacred objects and objects of cultural patrimony, Atu. But beyond that, our office acts as a liaison for Native Americans interested in the collections and all of the resources of the Natural History Museum and of the Smithsonian at large. And one of the programs that we have through the Smithsonian Office of Fellowships, which is Smithsonian-wide, although we have many of these museums that are kind of independent of each other, we're all under the larger umbrella of the Smithsonian Institution. And we have a fellowships office that offers funding for Native American community scholars to come and study the collections, work with Smithsonian researchers, work in the archives, work with experts there, whatever they want to do research-wise. Some of them are college students, Native American and minority college students, but for the Native American Community Scholars Program, they're usually non-traditional older students. They aren't in school currently, but they want to do research and study the collections. And I actually have copies of the grant applications up here if anybody's interested in that or knows of somebody that might be interested in it. And we've hosted, our repatriation office has hosted a number of community scholars over the years. This is a Caddo potter, Jerry Redcorn. She's a very famous Caddo potter. She came and studied the pottery of the Caddo people in our collections. And what these community scholars often do is they take the styles and the technology that they see in the collections and they reincorporate it into what they're producing today. They revive a lot of the cultural technology and the cultural art styles. They bring it back to life and incorporate it into their modern art that they're doing today. Or they replicate it for use again, in a sense almost like replicating the Atu. These ladies, Cecilia Petwanicott and Stephanie Rogers. Cecilia is from the Wikwemagong First Nation in Canada, and Stephanie is from the Amjingwanong First Nation in Canada. Her tribe begins with 2 A's, so she was first in line at the opening of the National Museum of the American Indian, the parade on the mall. Her tribe was alphabetically number 1. And they came together and worked as a team to study the Potawatomi and Ojibwa clothing and textiles, beadwork, ribbon work, everything like that, because they replicate this. And they had planned, and I think they've been working on it, making sets of clothing for men, women, and children that date to different eras in time. So in a sense, they wanted to ultimately do some kind of like a fashion show to show how the clothing evolved based on these museum collections. And although I'm at the Natural History Museum, this Smithsonian-wide scholarship can fund people to work at both institutions. So we act as a sponsor often. People come and work with us. We're their main host. But we set it up to where they can visit the collections at the Museum of the American Indian as well. And then they get to work with all of the Indian collections, no matter what museum they're at. Richard Sywink, also from the Wikwemagong First Nation in Canada. The last bow and arrow maker in his community died without passing on that knowledge to anyone, and so he came to the Smithsonian to study bows and arrows from all over the Great Lakes and from the plains and really all over the world to see how different cultures made these. And then he's been now making arrows and bows and trying to revive that technology and that use. Here he is meeting with Mike Frank, who's one of our archaeologists on staff, who's an expert bow maker. He's made about 80 bows modeled on those in our collections. And so I make arrows, and we taught Richard how to make bows and arrows, and he picked it up faster than anybody we'd ever met. Taught him how to flint knap and chip the arrowheads and things like that. And these ladies, same as community scholars, a lot of these visits start kind of with repatriation consultations. People from the community come, talk to us about repatriation, and then they find that there's much more there besides human remains or cultural objects that they might want back. They want to come and they want to spend time and they want to work with us on things. That's what happened with these ladies, is the same-ish visitors came on a repatriation visit. They gathered information about our collections, about human remains and objects, and they found out that we also had remains of a woolly dog. This is a picture of a dog down at the foot of this weaver here. It's I think one of the few known or supposed images of a woolly dog. And these dogs were bred for their hair and used in wool and textiles, and I believe they're kept separate from other breeds. And the breed doesn't exist anymore. And when they found out that we had remains of a known woolly dog in the collections, they got very excited. So when their repatriation delegates went home to their community and they were reporting to the council on the repatriation, what remains we had, things like that, the elders cut them off and they said, okay, enough about this repatriation stuff. Tell us about the woolly dog. We really want to know about the woolly dog. Because the dog was more important to their identity even than the objects that we had in the collections. And they wondered, would it be possible to clone the woolly dog, bring back the breed from the remains of the woolly dog that we had. We don't think cloning's possible just yet, but they were interested in DNA analysis of it, and we happen to have some of the top dog DNA experts at the time working at the museum. And so they began a project where they did DNA testing of the dog remains, and have gone on to do DNA testing of some of the hair and some of the textiles that they found in the Smithsonian museums and other museums. And this is the skin of the woolly dog. This dog's name was Mutton. We know how mutton was collected, and a naturalist was in that region collecting salmon and otters and things like that. And according to his journal, Mutton got in to the materials he had collected and had eaten one of the otters that he'd painstakingly prepared for shipment. And he wrote in his journal, so I added Mutton to the collection. Got his revenge on Mutton. So when people come to the Smithsonian for repatriation, they often find that there's a lot more there than just the concerns of trying to get objects or remains back. That there are things that the museum is interested in doing about preserving and protecting, and things maybe that we never even saw would be important, like the dog. Our mammals people probably never realized how important that dog remains would be to a people and to a culture. more important even perhaps in some ways than some of their own ancestors, because it's so integral to their identity. And so for the museum, it's a lesson for us that we cannot ever underestimate how important museum objects and anything in the collections might be, because we may not know everything about it, about how it fits or how important it might be to people. So we have to operate under the assumption that everything in the collections is important. Everything is significant. It may not be significant to my area of research or specialization or interest, but it may be to people out there. So we have to treat everything as precious and assume that it's precious to someone out there. And that leads us to the Bennett family. George Bennett, I'd met doing repatriations, bringing back the killer whale hat to Mark Jacobs. George was present at that, and we began talking about his interest. He makes bentwood boxes. He and his son are both artists, and so we talked about this program, and he applied. He and James, his son James, applied, and they were accepted into the program. And people just identify a sponsor like myself, and they apply. They give a proposal to the Smithsonian Office of Fellowships and a few letters of reference from people that know they're serious, they're going to carry out this research, and they're appropriate people to let into the museum. And they come. And the Bennetts did this at the end of September and into early October. And they happened to be coming at the same time that we were opening our new Oceans Hall, which was a big $35 or $80 million exhibit hall. We had life-size, we have life-size North Atlantic right whales hanging from the ceiling that are exact models of whales that we're tracking with GPS systems around the world now. We can tell at any time where that whale is. We've been following it since she was born. Her name's Phoenix. She's 21 years old. And because it's everything about the oceans, we have information in there about people whose relationship with the ocean is very important, including the Tlingit people. We have a canoe that Sea Alaska commissioned for us that's hanging in the exhibit. We have some headdresses and rattles from Hoona. And we didn't know it at the time, but the day that the Bennetts were flying in, I ran into Bambi Krause and her mom Frances, who are here at the conference also, and they told us that they were going to be at the opening ceremony of the Oceans Hall 2 days later, and there was going to be a dance group there that Jackie Johnson of NCAI was organizing, and that we should call them and ask and let her know the Bennetts were coming. We did, and they invited the Bennetts to join them for the dance performance. They were already on the plane before I could call them and let them know that that they were being invited to this. So when they got off the plane at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, I told them they were invited to this opening, and right away George says, "I didn't bring any regalia. I didn't know that we were going to do anything like that. Can you check something out of the museum for me to wear?" And I said, "Probably not. It's a little over 24 hours away. Something like that was kind of a big deal to the museum, and might have to. It might be difficult for them to do on short notice." But I said, "But we'll ask. The least we can do is ask. I'll help you ask." And so the next morning, it was a Friday morning, and the opening was set for Saturday. We went to the museum and we talked to the conservator. Here is Greta Hansen holding this robe in the background there. The head conservator, we spoke to her, and she said she didn't see why we couldn't do this if we could find something that was strong enough to withstand the dancing with it, because many of the blankets, the robes that we have, are very weak. They're very old and very fragile. And as long as it also tested low enough for pesticides, the pesticides that we could tell were on the object, arsenic, mercury, things like that we could test for, because some of the objects have been treated either by the collector hundreds of years ago or by the museum during its history of hundreds of years. We don't always know if something has something on it. So we didn't want George to be exposed to something that might be on an object. And for George, it was, all of these things were important as well. He'd worked with museums as well and knew that these things were of concern, and he agreed with them. And he also wanted to make sure that whatever he might wear was culturally appropriate too. So we looked through the collections and looked at every robe we could, and some of the ones that were stronger, they were eagle side, so he couldn't, was not going to bring out something that was eagle side. And finally we found this robe. The last one that we checked was this robe that was purchased in Juneau in 1892, and we didn't know where it came from. All we knew was it's purchased in Juneau. It didn't mean that it came from here, that it belonged to the Aquan people necessarily. but it was ravenside, and so he thought that might be appropriate for him to bring out, but he wasn't going to wear it. He was just going to hold it because we might ultimately find out what clan that was, and he didn't want to offend that clan by having them see a picture of him later wearing something he wasn't supposed to wear. But at least it was raven, so he felt he could hold that folded on his shoulder. So they brought this out, and James, his son, who's Wushkitan, placed it on him in front of the crowd that was gathered for the opening. And they danced the blanket for the first time in over 100 years. As far as George was concerned, this is the only object that's alive in our collections because it's been brought out and danced and brought back to life. That life has been infused back into it. In the background here, you see Frances Krause and Kolene's mom also, and Jackie Johnson dancing there. After they finished, and George opened the Oceans Hall with this. He was the first one to speak and welcome everybody and tell the story of this blanket and what we were able to do as far as bringing it out for them. And then some Hawaiian performers performed as well. They blew their horns, we dropped the curtains, and the crowd rushed in. And 42,000 people visited the Oceans Hall that day. It was filmed by PBS Crews, etc. So it was a big deal for George, for us, the museum, for them to be able to help us honor the hall and honor some of the objects that were in the collections in this way. Now we went beyond that, and George and James went beyond that in that they thought, well, there's really very little in the exhibit, and there's very little of stories being told in this exhibit. We're standing in front of an exhibit on salmon here with some salmon rattles actually behind me there. And George said that he wanted to speak to the public about Tlingit culture, and so they were there 2 weeks, and each Friday of those 2 weeks in the morning we went down and he spoke to the public about the objects that were in the collections and about Tlingit culture. And here we checked out a halibut hook from the museum's collections for him to talk about how the halibut hook is used, because we had an exhibit on halibut fishing in there as well with the Tlingit halibut hooks. And this was also taped by the education department so they could use it to train their docents even after he's gone. So as people come in and give people tours of the Oceans Hall, they'll be able to see what George had to say about this and integrate that into their talks about the hall. But George and James were primarily there to study the collections, to learn from the objects that were in the collections and the ancestors before. Now, I should have mentioned also before, when we first went into the collections to look among the robes, the first thing George did was he and James spoke to the objects and spoke to the ancestors before any cases were opened, so that they would let them know that they were there, what they were there for, apologize to anything or anyone that they might be disturbing by doing that, because among the collections they might run into shaman's objects or other things that were very important or powerful, and they wanted to kind of do what they could to set things right from the start before they even began to open the cases and look through these things. Now, George is particularly interested in bentwood boxes and makes bentwood boxes, so he was studying both the Haida, the Tlingit, anything from Northwest Coast that he could see in both museums. He was taking lots of measurements from and recording in detail and photographing. I believe this is called a telescoping box. And some of these slides are from the National Museum of the American Indian, where we worked over there, as well as at the Natural History Museum. These are just some examples. The timestamp on there is incorrect. It wasn't 2007. It was all in October of this year. And horn spoons. And this just shows some examples of some of the kinds of things that they saw while they were there. Just the tip of the iceberg, because there's 1,500 Tlingit objects in Natural History's collections. Uh-oh, I hope we didn't just mess with some kind of product licensing there. Some of the armor, headdresses. I believe the Museum of the American Indian has over 2,000 Tlingit items. While we were there and at the Museum of the American Indian, they also brought out, among the hats they brought out was the sea urchin hat that I believe is De Chitan from Angoon. And the hat has a lot of bear teeth, that some of which are fragmented and split. And earlier in the same day that we saw this hat, we had looked in a bentwood box and saw a tiny bear tooth fragment in that box. And the staff had it put in a plastic bag and marked that it had been found in that box in 1993. And so later in the day when we saw the hat, we looked at all those teeth and we said, let's get that back out again, and got that bag out, that tooth from that box. And Tom Evans of the Museum of the American Indian is seen here with the hat. He's trying to look for where that tooth might go if it came from that. And this is Mary Jane Lentz. She's their sponsor, the co-sponsor of this scholars program for the NMAI. So if anybody comes from the communities up here, I would contact her and say, Mary Jane, would you agree to co-sponsor this group with me? And we'll both work together to arrange for their access. James was able to, or Tom Evans was able to find where it went. On the hat, it did fit one of these teeth, and right away they called the head conservator, Jessie Johnson, here, and she reattached it on the spot. And so by their being there and working with these collections and recognizing what they were seeing, they were able to help restore one of these important hats that I believe may be repatriated to the De Chitan. I believe it may be under claim, at least right now. So both our museums benefit in many ways from having scholars come and visit with us and share with us. This is Chief Shake's canoe from the Nayayi in Wrangell, and it is, Bill Holm tells me he's measured it, and it's exactly 44 feet long. And we brought this out, and it's stored in the oversized collections. You can see there behind you, this looks kind of like the scene from Indiana Jones, where at the end where they hide the Ark, we always joke with people that the Ark's in there somewhere, we just can't remember which shelf it's at. And but this is where the really big things are, the large poles and Olmec heads. And this canoe is one of the largest things that we have in the collections, and we brought it out. And George gave a speech as if he was arriving in the canoe at a village. And he gave the speech in Tlingit and allowed us to videotape this to kind of show the importance of what this canoe meant and how significant it was and how people would have used this in the communities in the past. He also spoke with our conservators. We have a loan that the museums are preparing. 400 objects from the Natural History Museum and 200 objects from the Museum of the American Indian are being prepared right now to go to Anchorage for a long-term exhibit. And at that exhibit, objects we expect will be accessed by researchers from communities and will be handled and studied in depth. And so the conservators are working to prepare the objects to make sure they're strong enough and stable for handling, and that and to make sure that they're handling them in culturally appropriate ways as much as possible in the collections. So he met with the conservators and was going through the objects and advising them on what they should and shouldn't do and what they were looking at. Because conservators, whenever they send something out for loan, they document the object very thoroughly. They want to make sure they know what's being sent out and what its condition is, so they can monitor the condition. If something happens to it while it's on loan, they can tell how it's changed, and if necessary, make some repairs or restorations to help make sure that it's strong enough to be able to handle being put on exhibit. And they allowed us to videotape this.
First thing I want to do is I want to start off with a rattle that's over here. And this particular rattle,
this is just a sample of the video. It's poor quality, I apologize for that, but we wanted to show you that we worked in many media to try to help George document what he was trying to share with the museum.
If you look at this rattle here, and I want to go and just kind of discuss what you're looking at. You can see it's a much larger rattle. If you've actually looked at other Tlingit rattles rather than the more famous rattles of the Tlingit society is the one that looks like ravens, okay? And even then, some shamans had those kind of rattles as well. And some of those other rattles could be used for song leaders as well, but not this particular one right here. This is a shaman rattle. And sometimes rattles are actually used to call the spirits, okay? and also some that could be used for trying to chase away bad spirits as well. Design work on this, you can see that it does have a lot of Tlingit formline. Formline meaning the actual way that the design is created. Black always referring to it as primary formline area, which is actually the main structure of the beginning of formline work, meaning that it's sort of like a framework of where you would be working from. The red area, we refer to those as the secondary areas. When you look at what we refer to as ovoids, which is this round area right here, ovoids, which is the eye, U-shapes right here, okay, U-shapes in here, you can go to another perfect U, but U-shapes can be adjusted in any way depending on where you're going to put it on. Now with each item, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you just a little bit of a description of what we're looking at. And some of them I may not go into complete detail, and a lot of times it's not because I don't know about it, but because sometimes the sensitivity of the item may not allow me to want to go there with it, okay? But I will identify it as an object of such. Now, I know this one here is in my mind, is a very simple piece of equipment for the shaman, because he uses it nearly every time that he's doing whatever he's going to be doing for that particular day and whatever his direction allows him to do for an event for that day.
So that was just a sample of what George was, how he was lecturing the conservators and informing them of what it was they were working with and the significance of what it was they were working with, and in some cases the cultural sensitivities of what they were working with, because some of these objects, especially on this table at this time, were shaman's objects, and he wanted to make sure that they were aware of what it was they were handling and advise them on how they might handle it. And for some reason it's not allowing me to advance. There we go. And he did this for both the conservators at the Natural History Museum and the National Museum of Natural History, the conservators at both museums that are working on Tlingit collections that are to come up for the Anchorage loan. And he looked at some large objects as well. This is a screen from Wrangell, maybe Nayai. It's actually 1/4 of a screen, 4 screens like this. As we were leaving the museum one day at the end of the visit, we ran into a reporter from the LA Times, and that's who he's talking to here, taking notes on the left. So we went right back into the collections, and she interviewed him and he gave her a lecture on Tlingit formline design. So at this point, although we had originally hoped that the Bennetts would be able to be here to talk about their impressions of their experience, and so it wouldn't just be the museum talking, but since we're not able to do that, as I said, we're honored to have George's daughter Anna, if you would join us please, at this time to speak about what followed on that, and perhaps to tell us a little bit about what your family has told you about the visit.
Thank you for inviting me to speak about my experience the one day that I was at the Smithsonian and meeting with Eric and a few other of the anthropologists that were there to help me. I didn't realize how much knowledge I had until I had been with people who didn't grow up in the way that we were raised. I'm half Tlingit, Wishkitan, and I'm also Athabaskan and Inupiaq Eskimo. So when I went to the Smithsonian, and they had handed me pages of what my parents had already looked at and cataloged, and I was very interested in some of the armor and how it was made, being an artist myself and doing a lot of my mother's traditional Athabascan and Inupiaq Eskimo work, a lot of the outfits and a lot of beadwork and everything, I was very interested in how they made the actual armor itself, and not knowing that Athabascan and Tlingit people were kind of the same. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be looking at certain items because I'm a female, or touching certain items because I'm a female. So we waited about 45 minutes for a male anthropologist to come and actually pick up certain items for me, so I can take a look at how it was all made. And it was very, very intriguing on all of the materials that were used, and how they look like baskets, and the way that they were described in the cataloging process was the dowels that you see. I don't know what year this one was from, but the way that they described it, and the best way that they could at that time, was they described it as dowels being stripped from like willows or whatever. So it was interesting to kind of get going back on how people really didn't do any research when they started cataloging these items. But if you can see the alternating rows on some of these, some of the armor was actual human hair, and other items that they used to put together. And on the top of the armor was it was painted red, and on the bottom of the armor it was painted red too. And they were all, it was just so precise, and I was so impressed by how long ago. And then we were trying to figure out how the armor itself was placed, on how many different layers was used and what materials it was. So there was some of the armor that I looked at that it was thicker on one side of the shoulder and thinner on the other side, where it was tied off, and then putting this around their chest area. And then there was other items with that were found in the southeast that were like made from different hides, and even ones for little people and like younger children, and seeing whether or not that was like a form of wealth back then. So it was very interesting on how they were able to use the resources that they had. And I was trying to figure out how, especially with the moose hide, it was so thick, and how to put all of these pieces together. And being an artist, I was like, wow, I wonder what they used, I wonder how long it took them, and all those things. So I was very, very grateful to be able to be invited to the Smithsonian. And there was some items that I wasn't comfortable in looking at. The shaman items I wasn't comfortable in looking at, and there were some other things that I wasn't allowed to look at because I'm a female. So just seeing the pictures from my parents and all of the beadwork and everything else, but I was more intrigued by all of the Tlingit armor, and how long it may have taken, and how it was woven. And just all the respect that I can give to all of those people back then. So, but thank you for inviting me here.
Geez, Anna. I should have mentioned that George and James came with George's wife Mary and their daughter Kathy as well, who visited the collections, and kind of a little more informally, but they got to see a lot of things. And Anna was not able to join the whole family at that time, but about a week after they attended, you were in town for another conference, and so had heard about this visit, and so we're able to kind of tag on a little bit of time to take a little time away from the conference and come visit us. We appreciate that. Gunakshish. And then a couple months after, I believe, after this visit, Lyle and Kolene James were in town also, and we're happy to have people drop in on us. And their mom had been in the Oceans Hall opening and met me there, and so she said that they're coming to town, and would we be able to get them access? And of course, we'll try to get people in to see the collections at any time. So pleased to ask Lyle and Kolene to come up and share with us.
Atlengonis chish takatuhan gonis chish hatia di khunkiyan ya yegi konachek o adeya irachunya. Thank you, everyone, my friends, for being here today. Yes, it is very good to see you. This opportunity to visit the museum and other museums, we didn't do this by ourselves. We got help from many people. Hunatotum and Cape Fox Corporation helped us go to these museums. Also along with Mary Beth Moss, Steve Hendrickson, Eric Hollinger, Owen James, George Ridley, Richard Jackson, Jim Hoff, Norma Jean Dunn, and Dan Montieth, and UAS staff instructors such as Janis Criswell, Hendrickson, and Dwayne Bosch. These people have been our advisors in helping us understand our atu and how to handle them and what to expect. So, and Janis Criswell, Hendrickson, and Dwayne Bosch, they are university instructors here in Juneau, and they help us with the art. Janis is a weaver, an extremely good weaver. And then Dwayne Bosch is also a carver who comes into town from Hona. He is Wushkitan, and he teaches carving of many styles. So we would like to thank all of them for opening the door of opportunity to speak and understand our culture through this type of journey of our atu. Also, we would like to thank the following museums for allowing us to come and visit and speak to our ancestors, such as Chicago Field Museum, New York American Museum of Natural History, DC Natural History Museum of the Smithsonian, and also our State Museum for taking care of our atu.
So we're really humbled by the list of people that have supported us and opened the door to our ancestors and our atu. And Lyle and I, we were both raised dancers. I was raised in Ketchikan and Metlakatla, and Grandma Esther Shea, she taught me most of what I know today as far as singing and drumming and my identity. And Lyle the same with both Huna and Cake. And we have a dance group here in Juneau, the Wush'in dancers. And so when you go to visit these collections, you just never know what you're going to see. And I just want everyone here to know that we had no clue what we were going to see. We didn't have anything in mind. We just knew that we were coming to visit our ancestors. And as we heard earlier today, our spirits, every item and object that we looked at, we were very careful. And before we came to the museum in DC, Lyle and I had both participated, had the honor and privilege to travel with our clans to Chicago and New York to bring back some of our human remains, our ancestors, to bring them home. And I was only able to go because I helped compose a cry song. And then, of course, my husband is teaching Tlingit here and learning at the university at the same time. And so we were very fortunate. These weren't things that these weren't paths that we knew were coming towards us, but we were certainly open to them. And very honored that the elders and leaders who were with us were very careful to teach us protocol. And of course, we didn't learn all of protocol. We learned some protocol because it was on the spot. But anyway, let me get back to the rattles. So we have a dance group, and we happen to be going through the different drawers. And if you've never been to visit a collection, the museum staff, they are so wonderful. And they're so helpful. We really didn't know how to prepare for our visit, other than a couple of emails between Eric Hollinger and myself and Lyle. He encouraged us to bring lots of batteries and lots of film so that we could take lots of pictures. And of course, wearing comfortable shoes and getting lots of rest. So we found these rattles. And I love rattles. If you notice, there's puffin beaks, and there's a hand grip, and we could only imagine. Today, we see a lot of our dance groups use deer hooves and connected to something, whether it's devil's club or driftwood or a horn. That was one of my most... I was a little kid in a candy shop. Woo! So every time we opened a drawer, I was trying to maintain, my composure around the staff. But I was just, woo! And pretty soon I just let loose, and I was squealing, and oh my gosh! So we were taking all sorts of pictures and opening up drawers as quick as we could, with the drawers that we knew that didn't hold the shaman items or remains, or at least that we were aware of. As the young lady mentioned earlier, George Ridley had mentioned to me, had instructed to me not to be in the same room as the shaman items or the shaman remains. So as much as I could within the short time that we had, I tried to stay away from any of the areas out of respect for our culture. But, okay. This is our bling. It's just our trade beads. It's, again, when we opened up the drawer, I'm a raven. And
She pushed me off the way.
pushed him out of the way. I told you, I just let it all go after a while. We opened the drawers, and the staff, they were so wonderful. Items that we weren't too sure if it was too fragile to touch, they were right there with us, assisting and holding items for us so that we could get a closer look. Amazing, amazing. If you folks are ever traveling and you have some time, if you know in advance that you're going to be in a city or a place where there's a museum, I have not run into any barriers. We gave heads up to all of these places months in advance to let them know that we were coming, or we worked with the corporations and wonderful people like Mary Beth Moss and Irene Dundas, who already had that knowledge. They helped. They opened the doors. They were right there with us, or made sure that we were following protocol and able to access our. I'm a weaver in training, and a little kid in the candy store and seeing what our ancestors had done before us and just how hip we were with the times. We were able to keep up with the change, and this just, took my breath away when I opened the drawer and saw this beautiful woven hat. Okay. The staff that we were working with didn't understand why Lyle and I stopped everything and our mouths started to drool. This was a carved gumboot, and amazing what our people so talented, such detail. And, we were very careful to handle items, but I couldn't help but touch the gumboots growing up on the rocks and going out gumboot picking with my family at low tide. And to see how big, it just, ooh. Wishing I had ooligan grease at the time. Of course, we saw other wonderful items. I don't know if you want to talk about that. Oh, okay. So we, of course, we handled items and curious and asked questions, lots of questions. And the staff, they were able to give us information, share information from what other scholars. Lyle and I are not scholars by no means when it comes to the history that we were in the presence of, but certainly curious and always looking and open to people sharing information with us, and just fascinated. It's a pipe. It's a mussel, carved mussel, and I'm not familiar with the tobacco use with our people, but this came from Southeast Alaska. I just found it, just the details, just phenomenal. Oh, okay.
A few slides back where we showed George Bennett standing next to the canoe, this canoe here. When we first showed up there, Eric had shared a short story with me about two groups of people, one in a canoe and one alongside of them. It was a group of Tlingit people in this canoe, and the Russians were passing by, and the clan leader in our canoe was looking at them. And as he was looking at them, he saw the head guy give a command and point towards them. And the clan leader knew exactly what was about to happen. So he told all his men, get onto the other side and Tlingit. So all the men did as they were told and adjusted to one side. And just as they did that, the canoe tipped over on its side. All the men in the other canoe who were passing by shot at them with their muskets. And just as they finished, he told all the men, go back to the other side, straighten up the canoe. And they did that. And they balanced. And what they heard was the bullets from their muskets hit the bottom of the canoe. And all the men just looked at them, grabbed their paddles and paddled away. It's stories that come with all these belongings that we really hunger for and want to understand how these things played in our life. And it's just amazing to hear the stories that come with each item and to be able to place it as part of our history. We were so honored that when we get to speak with the elders about a piece of history or a piece of atu and find out exactly where did this come from. And then we start to place these little links along our history, like this canoe It belonged to my great-grandfather, Charlie Jones. It's along that history that Chief Shakes. My father, Owen James, sitting in the back, along with his father, my grandfather, Kelly James, would always share stories of our history. And many elders that we have come across would always tell us, your history is the strongest link to your ancestors. Our stories are not just stories, they are part of who you are. So being able to see these things that existed so long ago was just amazing for us to sit there and look at. And like she was saying, drool all over. Just because the detail of all this atu just amazed us. And how well they could keep up with the time and make things happen. So that was our experience with the museum, and the staff members, like she was saying, just made sure that whatever we wanted to do, they said, okay, let's get it done. Don't worry, we'll be right back. We'll bring you in. So anything that we needed help with, or if there was information that they had and they didn't have it there, they would run off or send somebody to go find that piece of information and come back and show it to us. And we would say, okay, cool. Because then it would actually date a lot of these items for us. So they have such a thick log of information that you can actually place these items to where they come from. So,
One more thing we wanted to mention, and we didn't really touch on it, but the museum also, they were very supportive because of our early experiences with Chicago and New York and our clan leaders and our elders who joined us. We learned some protocol, and so if you ever have an opportunity to visit the human remains, we highly encourage it. We brought gifts to bring to our ancestors, and of course, when we went to DC, they gave us page after page after page of ancestors who were in this room, and it was aisle after aisle after aisle of uncles and aunties and grandparents. And so if you have the time, please visit your relatives. We were able to bring some songs to our ancestors, not only in New York and Chicago, but also to DC. And we're very thankful that the museum made it possible for us to spend some time, some quiet time with our ancestors. So if you have any questions, we're not what's the word I'm looking for? Experts, but we'd be more than happy to help anyone get started if you're going to be traveling and you'd like to get some quick tips, or we can definitely steer you towards other people who are traveling and they know how to prepare for a museum visit. We would be more than happy to share that information with you. The museums all have wonderful websites, and Eric can talk about the collections that are available online.
Yeah, well, the Natural History Museum is trying to get more of our collections online, and we do have a website. I don't have the website here with me now, but you can just Google Smithsonian Institution Natural History Museum, and it'll take you into the anthropology collections, and you can actually access in there, and you can type in the types of objects that you want to see or the culture that you want to see. And for those that we have images already attached to the record, you can bring up there and see the images that are on there. And we're trying to add, as I said, we have 1,500 Tlingit objects, and we're trying to add more of those all the time. Now, if there's something else that you want to see, we have some images from the visit. We actually were just able to add these images in the last 5 minutes before the talk from the James's visit here, and they have images with them. So if you're interested, maybe we could even put them on the laptop here, and you can flip through and see some more of the objects that from the collections. We're sorry we didn't have time to add more of them, but it was kind of a last minute that we're able to join together as a group here to make sure that we had Tlingit representation up here as well, besides my own.
There was a lot of atu that was there that we really did not get the chance to see because limited time. I mean, my wife and I, we would get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, have our coffee, and catch the tram to the museum, and then we would go and spend a good 8 to 10 hours looking at all these items, and probably take about 20 minutes for a lunch break or something, and then get right back into it. Even though we spent a lot of time in there, it really wasn't enough time for us to look at all the things that were there. I mean, there is so much of our history that are in these museums that it's hard to really imagine all the things that are there. But what little time that we did have, which was a total of 2 days, really, we just touched the tip of the iceberg, and that's it. And we did see a lot of items that were of many clans, but we do not know exactly which clans and which territory it comes from. So if you've seen any bits of your atu, please forgive us. We do not know the history of all these items, but we appreciate seeing part of your history, because it's just a great deal for us to actually see these things. So, Atlan Gunnel Chish Anyut Kusani Shadinech Gunnel Chish Hatia Dia Hunkian Yayigi Konachik Ewe Adeya de Hunya Hu Joe Aya Gunnel Chish How Oiction.
Lyle and James. The Bennetts actually spent 2 weeks there and still didn't get to see everything. And they've said that they want to reapply to the program and try to come back again for another couple of weeks. And the program will fund people for up to 21 days, and it will supply some of the stipend towards the plane tickets or travel to get there, and then it will pay $150 a day stipend towards which you use towards food and rent and things like that. And that doesn't go far in DC. So it often helps if you have a relative or friend or some kind of contact to try to find some inexpensive housing there as well. But as I said, if you're interested or you think you might know someone that'd be interested, we have grant application forms up here, and there is also a website for this, and the applications can be found online and applied for. That's the Native American Community Scholars Program for the entire Smithsonian. Again, I'd like to thank Anna and Lyle and Kolene and the James, George and James Bennett, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but also thank the conference organizers and again the Aquan people and all of you for taking time to be with us and let us share some of our knowledge and experiences with you, and Gunakchish to all the ravens and eagles that are able to join us and share with us and help make this conference the good one that it is. Gunakchish. If you have any other questions, I suppose we should entertain those as well for Anna or for, yes, Robin? I believe I did see one article by Russell Barsh et al. that was published that had some information in it. I think there's a second article that has some other researchers involved. There's 2 or 3 teams of researchers that are researching woolly dog and woolly dog textiles, and I think they didn't all know about each other. And some of that work is still continuing. We're trying to make sure that they're aware of each other so they can start to cooperate and coordinate and share information and not duplicate too much effort. But I think they're still interested in more. 2 minutes till, so we're stopping right on time. But if you did have interest in seeing some images, I have a laptop. We can put some of the images on if Lyle and Kolene will indulge us, and we can run through some additional images of what they got to see there. Did you have another question?
Yes. I was wondering, you know, how you ended up with dead bodies. How come it doesn't go back to the villages that they came from? And how did you end up with your collection? How do you end up with collections from the Tlingit community?
The collections come to us, or have come to us from many different sources over the years. Some of the Smithsonian collections, especially those at Natural History, come even before the Smithsonian was founded in 1846. There was the Wilkes collecting expedition, which went all over the world and up the Pacific coast and collected items from during the 1830s. And then when it returned to Washington, that's about the time they got money from James Smithson in England, had donated money for the creation of the Smithsonian Institution, an institution to be founded in the United States for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. And Congress used that money and that collection to found the Smithsonian Institution. And then since then, they sent out collectors in the 1800s and early 1900s, where they sent ethnologists out to the Tlingit communities to purchase things and sometimes they commissioned things to be made. Swanton commissioned masks to be made, as well as purchasing things from people. The human remains, I'm not sure all the cases about how the human remains came to be there. Some were excavated by anthropologists and sent to the museum. Others were people just out and finding things or stumbling on them, or things that they found during construction projects, and they just sent them into the museum in some cases. So just about every type of possible source. In the old days, the Smithsonian was where you sent anything. Things just came to us in the mail. Actually, the Hope Diamond was mailed to us in the U.S. mail. So we'd have to look at each object or each set of remains to look at the history of how those came to be in the museum. Now, as Steve mentioned earlier in his talk, on repatriation, there are repatriation laws that cover the Smithsonian. We're not subject to NAGPRA. We're the only federal entity that's not, because we were actually subject to repatriation laws before NAGPRA. In 1989, when the National Museum of the American Indian was created, the law that created them also had repatriation requirements for the entire Smithsonian. So the NMAI and our museum are subject to the repatriation provisions of the NMAI Act. And those provisions required us to send lists of all the remains and artifacts that we had to every tribe in the country. And so in the 90s, we sent lists to every Alaskan community of all the material that we had from their region. And people still contact us today and ask us for updated lists. They may not have it again. We're easily accessible. We have a large website. We're probably the #1 place when you type in repatriation. You either get National NAGPRA or us, because we have the largest website, and all of our reports that we've done are actually online, or summaries of them are online. So we have a lot of information on it. We've repatriated more remains than any museum in the country. Over 5,000 remains and over 100,000 objects have been repatriated from our museum alone. We still have a lot left in the museums, but the tribes that we work with are aware that they're there, and we try to come to places like this to continue to make sure they're aware of them, and continue to consult with the repatriation representatives to see when they're ready. They know where to find us, but until then, we're always open to hosting people to come and visit in the meantime, as Kolene and Lyle were mentioning. Does that answer your question? Gunakchish, then. Thank you. Steve tells me that there's not another session in here, so that if we did want to put the jump drive on here and run through images of other objects, we can do that. So, would you like us to do that? Okay. Well, we'll continue a kind of a Smithsonian show and tell then, if you're all right. Now this is beyond the paper, so I don't know if you want to keep filming or not, but we can do that. It's up to you guys. Sure. I also wanted to say, Bob, Sam, you've been to the Smithsonian a couple times, to the Natural History Museum, and I want to, if you would like to say something, I certainly want to open the floor to you and share with us whatever you'd like, if you'd like.
I'll be very brief and keep a low profile. I really enjoyed visiting the Smithsonian, NMAI, and the National Museum of Natural. I was able to have objects repatriated back to my family and clan. A mask that was in the National Museum of the American Indian. And I was very honored and impressed with the respect and the dignity that was shown by the Smithsonian and the staff, actually encouraging us to bring our objects home. That's very touching to be able to go to a museum like NMAI. It was real interesting for me to pick up an object and walk out the door with it and take it to the hotel and bring it all the way across the country. It was like bringing my namesake home. I only wish that all the museums across this country would be just as dignified. And I hope that it could be a good example for the curators, because those objects, they deserve coming back to life. They deserve to be used in ceremony. And we also thank the museum because they have a long history of taking care of these objects. There's nothing wrong with that. Done correctly, the museum benefits, and so do we. So thank you for allowing us to be a living culture and bring our objects back alive. And I especially want to thank you on behalf of that teenage boy we brought home. This boy was taken in 1916, and we were able to find the family, and this young boy had a name, and he had a family connection in Sitka, and the museum, because of that, allowed the claim to go in much quicker, and we were able to bring this young boy home and place him by his sister. So they're finally back together. And that family today is very, very happy for what we did for them. So thank you, Eric, for allowing me this short time.
So as Bob was mentioning, we have repatriated remains to the Tlingit. Not all of the remains from Tlingit territories have been requested for repatriation yet by their regions, but as I mentioned, we're there when people are ready to pursue that, and always willing to share information, and we don't push repatriation on people. Wow. And we don't resist repatriation, but we're there when people are ready and to work with them as best we can to pursue what they want to do when they want to do it.
So we're just gonna go through all the pictures really quick. I'm not too sure on a lot of the information that comes along with these items. We're just excited to look at these items. These rattles, there was a mess load of these rattles that we got to look at, and this one here actually caught our attention because it was so huge. These items that we're showing you now are items that we were brought to right off the bat as soon as we showed up to the Smithsonian. This one here is actually a beaver. Alder, I think. This is actually cones that go on top of this hat right here. I'm not an expert on explaining these things, so we just, like I was saying, really enjoyed looking at a piece of our history. This is another side view of the hat, and on the top portion is where the cones go. You can see where they have tied it down.
Just wanted to note that this is one of the hats that's coming up to Anchorage for long-term exhibit. I can't remember where it's from off the top of my head. There was some question as to whether it was Sagwadi because of the split killer whale. It's two killer whales coming from the same tail, but the tail is not split.
They actually provided a camera for us to use, and the cameras that they have are they just give us such detail of the atu.
Some of them a little blurry.
Yes. Usually it's the operator. Meaning myself. Again, we'd like to apologize for handling other clan atu, and we would be happy to share any of the pictures that we have from our collections we visited. Also, we encourage any and all interested people to apply with one or more people to share in the experience of cover more ground.
That's a good point, Kolene. When George and James applied, part of the reason why they both applied together, in addition to being father-son and both being artists, it was that they are opposites, so they wanted to balance each other when they were viewing and bringing these objects out. And many times during consultation, repatriation consultation visits, the communities will, if one clan is coming and they're seeking objects of their clan, they often will ask that someone from the opposite side be brought with them and be supported by our museum grants to bring them so that they can have that balance. And we recognize that, and we will support that. And we have repatriation consultation grants, and we'll recognize the need to bring someone from the opposite side to have that balance during the consultation visit. That is, I believe it's an eagle from the top of a pole from Fort Simpson, from the Simpson community there. And this, I only know that because this shows up in some very early drawings from the 1850s and a very old photograph from the 1870s that shows it in the community. And there were actually two little people, one under each wing there, that were missing, and I think they found those in the collection because I showed the conservators those old drawings, and they saw that this should have had this. Then they went back in the collection and looked through there, and they found these people that went as part of that, and that's going to go up as well as part of the Anchorage exhibit. Again, this isn't exclusive to Tlingit, but Tsimshian, Haida, some of those artifacts are in this exhibit. The exhibit is from all over Alaska. And we're interested in, this fellowship is not, or this program is not just for U.S. federally recognized tribes. As I mentioned, that several were Canadian. It's for Native Americans, period, to come on the scholar grant. So if you know Canadian scholars as well, Tsimshian or Interior Tlingit, they can apply as well. Oh, that I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't remember seeing that. You guys might have photographed that when I had to run out of the room to check on records or something. Kolene saying branches. She thinks it may be wrapped around some branches. This is a helmet. Tommy Joseph also showed this helmet the other day when he was talking about researching collections at the museums, and I think he mentioned that this is from the NMAI, but this is actually in the Natural Histories collections and being prepared to go up on loan as well. And this was, we did research this thoroughly because it was part of a repatriation request, and it is Ishkitan. It was collected on the Taco River just across the border in British Columbia, so this is Ishkitan clan. And it was actually part of a larger set of armor. The collector that was in that area, he was trying to purchase I think he was trying to get a canoe, and then he was trying to get a pole from the Ishkitan, and he was, according to his letters, which are fragmentary, he was in consultation with the clan leaders for quite a while, and finally they agreed to allow him to have this pole. It was a memorial pole, as long as he replaced it with a stone replacement. They wanted a marble one that would last longer, and so he was to have that made for them. And at the last minute, he said that the clan leader said, "Would you also like to have this really old set of armor?" And he kind of threw that in to sweeten the deal. And from what we can tell, this helmet and one collar, we're able to link back together. And there's some other pieces of armor from that we aren't sure if we can match up from that set. Yeah, sure. What she's referring to is the concern about potential pesticides. And when they were visiting, we happened to be in the middle of doing some some testing to see whether or not there were pesticide concerns with any of these cabinets, because we recognize and we operate under the assumption that anything in here may be contaminated by having been treated with pesticides or contaminated in its manufacture in the first place. We find that a lot of things had mercury applied to them as part of the red paint. Red paint often is made with vermilion, which has a cinnabar base, and cinnabar is basically some raw mercury, and bright red, but it's mercury. And when mercury breaks down, it gives off mercury vapor, which can more easily be inhaled or get in eyes and things like that. It's in its vapor form, but you can't see it, you can't taste it. And so what we were doing is we thought if there may be mercury on some of the objects in the collections, we wanted to, when the cases are closed, that mercury vapor may be building up in the cases. And so what we were in the process of doing was cracking the cases and taking readings to see whether the mercury levels were high enough to be of concern or not. And so we were opening many of the cases at that time, and it was just at the kind of the beginning of our study there to see whether we had any that were at high enough levels that we needed to be concerned about. And so where the instrument was detecting some higher levels, we were flagging them, putting tags on them that we needed to come back and have the health professionals assess whether or not these were of concern. But in the meantime, we were opening them then fully and allowing, if there was mercury vapor in it, then to allow that to dissipate, because it actually dissipates very rapidly. In most cases, less than a minute, it will come down to low levels. And so the day that they visited, we wanted to make sure that the cabinets they were going to were safe, that there wasn't anything of concern there. So they opened just about everything, all of the cabinets in that aisle, and there were lots of strange smells. A lot of them are natural and from the materials that they're made with or from the cabinets. But I'm sure it was kind of a eye-opening experience for you, and it's something that we're trying to do to be proactive to find out if there are hazards in our collections. We want to know about them as much as you do, and we want to make sure that we and you can continue to access them as safely as possible. Yes. Yes, correct. We try to keep it as climate controlled as possible, the temperature and humidity. It's a big facility. We didn't really show any slides of that, but they're housed in what we call a pod, and each pod is the size of a football field and 3 stories tall. And we just built pod 5, and we're already out of room and planning to build pod 6. All of the ethnology objects are all in one pod. So they take up 3 floors. Now this is material from all over the world that is housed in these pods. I think that may be the collar that goes with that helmet. It's a collar like that anyway. But buildings that big can be very hard to keep consistent climate control, and so each cabinet often has additional ceiling to try to make sure that air doesn't go back and forth too easily, so that if something happens as far as the air conditioning or climate control system breaks down, if there's a power outage or something like that for a short period, that it won't change so rapidly that the objects may get harmed. That's a mural outside one of our laboratories. Used to be on exhibit for a long time. When they took down the exhibit, they didn't want to throw it out, so they put it up there. And when tribes come to visit, they always try to find their tribe in there, and they often say, you guys need to add our guys into that. That's the screens again. These screens were requested for repatriation by the Deshitan because Viola Garfield had written that they came from the Gunhit in Killisnoo, and she published on that. And when we researched the case, we found that the people she talked to in Angoon never actually said that. And she later, in the 1950s, wrote a letter saying, I made a mistake when I said that, that the people said that if a screen had come from Angoon, it would have come from Gunhit, but the screen in Gunhit had a hole in it. And so the screen, what we do know about it is it was purchased in Wrangell from a Mrs. Robert Shedesti. And so I hope to talk with people here about connections to the Shedesti family. And it may be actually Nayayi, it may be a bear. And that's, again, another benefit of having the Bennetts visit and other people and look at the design on here. And they said they don't think that it's beaver. There are eagle elements in here as well. There, I think you can see perhaps some eagle forms inside the sides. And then the feet of this creature, too, have talons, as if it's a creature in morphing and a transformational creature. So they think that it wouldn't make sense to have eagle and beaver on the same screen, so it may be probably a bear then as well. What we thought were buck teeth, the museum people thought might be buck teeth. Tommy Joseph and the Bennetts and others and said, well, that's a stylistic design of the tongue. It's not buck teeth, it's the tongue. These are staffs, and we have different objects are housed in different types of spaces. I think we have about 9 different types of storage, depending on what the object shape is and its size, about what's best for the object. So bows and arrows and staffs and paddles like this are housed on these kind of racks. Mary Beth, you also visited our museum and our collections. You're welcome to come and comment also on what your thoughts are. That would be, I'd be very interested to see that and see if we could make some comparisons there. I think the Shedesti family was, I thought there was a Shedesti that was a brother to one of the early chief sheikhs. So it was purchased by John Swanton in 1906, along with other objects in Wrangell. This one, the museum, unfortunately, there were 2 panels of these, with 2 of these animals side by side on each panel. And so they're 14 feet long and 7 feet high. And the museum, when they came in, they cut them in half. So they made 4 panels. I still don't know why they did that. They may have decided they only had 7 feet of space to display one, because they had one on display for many years. And they touched up the paint on it. It actually looks worn, like it had been outside for some time. There's some erosion of the surface where it's kind of worn down, and a lot of the detailed lines were black lines, some of them very thin, and the paint is worn off of them, but it was on there long enough to support it, so it almost looks like the lines are in relief. So although these photos don't show it, one of the things we did is we used raking light, and we photographed every square inch of that, and there's lots of detail in the designs there that don't show from a good 2-dimensional shot. But one of the things we'd like to do is work with somebody to do a detailed drawing of what that actually looked like in its original form. The black paint, we think, is the original paint that was put on there, but the red paint on there was definitely something the museum put on there. We tested the paint on the frame around it and tested the red paint on the panels, and it's identical. So they touched up the frame with the same paint that they painted the red on the figure as well, and we think they painted over some things they shouldn't have.
A lot of these pictures, you'll see, if it looks like they're just random, really bad shots of the pictures, what we were trying to do was show how our people put the instruments together. And so you'll see like little pictures of pegs and cedar twine used to close different instruments.
That's another good point. There's one of the benefits of being there and you're able to see things in 3 dimensions. There are probably parts of these objects that you're very interested in that we wouldn't know that. So we can take photographs of them and send them to you, things like that. Actually, I think we may have a CD of a large number of the Tlingit objects that we could always make a copy of and send to you, but they are just the object on a table or in a light box, and they may not show the side or the views or the details that you're going to be interested in for your purposes. So nothing can replace actually coming and seeing them and letting you dictate the photos and take the pictures you want. The halibut hooks remind me, actually, George and I had talked about him coming down and visiting for a long time, and then he was in town for the rededication, or the 25th anniversary of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I didn't know he was in town, and he called me from the National Mall in front of the Air and Space Museum and says, "I've got 3 hours to kill, what can you show me?" And I grabbed a list of the Tlingit objects, and I ran across the mall to Air and Space and got him on the shuttle over at the NMAI, and we rode out to Suitland, Maryland, which is where all these collections are housed. They're so big we don't even have room in the museum for them. We actually house almost all the collections in a facility in Suitland, Maryland. And so he got to see some of the objects there, got a taste of what the facility looked like and what might be there, so he could then prepare his grant request for coming back onto this program. And I remember in that short time that we had together there, one of the things that we saw was this halibut hook. And he immediately starts telling the stories of how the halibut hook is used, and when it's thrown over the side of the boat, how you can't look over the side because the halibut has both its eyes on the same side of his head and it might see you. And he talked about a phrase that you're supposed to say when you throw the halibut hook over. And all of this rich kind of culture with these objects that the museum might look at it as it's a fish hook. Well, it's a lot more than a fish hook to the Tlingit people, and that's when George and I were talking about how, well, this is exactly what we're talking about with these community scholars programs, is this is an opportunity for you to share with the museum your knowledge of these objects. And if you want, we can document that, we can add that to the information associated with the object. We could add the Tlingit name for the object in the museum's record side by side with it, and we can say, according to George Bennett, this is used this way, blah, 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 that kind of thing. So we can, in a sense, continue to build the cultural knowledge that the museum houses and can share with future generations.
Talk about how, like I said, when we went to visit the museum, it wasn't necessarily always cataloged with a really good description. It would just say Tlingit or Haida or Sichan, and then we wouldn't know if it was a shaman item or not. Because sometimes I think we might have seen some shaman items mixed in with the other collection.
Yes. Yeah, the museum doesn't always have good records with the collections. As I was saying, they came in many different forms and many different sources, and we were often dependent on the person who collected them to send information with them. And sometimes they just said Tlingit, or from Southeast Alaska, or from Sitka. And as you know, just that it came from Sitka, it could mean it was mailed from Sitka. It could mean it was purchased in Sitka, but that doesn't necessarily identify which village it actually came from, or which clan it actually came from, or who made it. And sometimes when collections came in, they didn't even have the culture associated with them. And the curator in the museum, for all practical, they essentially guessed. And some of these guys really knew what they were doing for some cultures, and others they were total idiots, and they would guess based on something they thought they knew. And so even the cultural affiliation sometimes is questionable. We have things that are identified as Tlingit that sure look like they're Tsimshian. Now, did that mean they were made by the Tsimshian people and given to Tlingit, and then we, our collectors or whoever sent that to the museum, obtained it from a Tlingit? We aren't sure. We think all those things happened. And so, and that's an issue for repatriation purposes too. If anyone who's worked in repatriation knows that can be a real problem, because you can't always trust the museum records, and we sometimes need to figure out those kinds of things. Even some of the objects for the Anchorage loan that we were looking at, it may say it's from this location. That rattle, actually, I think we were looking at, and it said from, I think it said from Baranoff Island on it, and it didn't make sense because that was actually written on it. But then in the catalog record, I think it said Admiralty Island, and it was a bear. So to George, when he saw that, and it was never part of the museum record, but when he saw that, he said, okay, well, this is a bear from Admiralty Island, so it's probably Tequadi from Angoon. And so there, boom, we can fill in the village and the the clan for that, because someone who knows what they're looking at and can, in a sense, merge with the museum record or clarify the museum record and give a cultural affiliation for the object. That's another reason why we'd like to have people come visit and help us figure out what these are. They're going to start the final section or a session in about 5 minutes next door. So if we'd like to wrap things up here and move over for that. Again, Guna Cheese for allowing us to share this with you.